This is a breaking news alert. There is no trade deal between Canada and the United States. Moments ago, the United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer put out a statement saying that Canada declined to finalize the trade deal. As I noted yesterday, Donald Trump and his regime was pretending that there was a deal or a concept or a framework, that Donald Trump did his own extension right when the deadline was about to hit. And I said, I don't believe there's a deal. Show me the paperwork. Show me the deal. Now we're hearing from the United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. He says that the United States will be imposing 50% tariffs on Canada. Right now, we've heard from Prime Minister Carney, who has responded, Canada will be engaged in severe and swift retaliation against the United States. Prime Minister Carney said that he would not submit and be bullied by the United States. And Carney always said from the outset that no deal is better than a bad deal. And as I've always said, you can't do any deal with bad people. And Donald Trump is a fraud, and the people he surrounds himself with are frauds and bad people. Trump is a felon. Trump separately is a sexual predator. He is a deviant. There is no doing deals with people like Donald Trump. Let's take a look at what the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer just said. This is breaking news right now, folks. Greer says that Canada declined to finalize the trade deal. Canada is continuing its retaliation against the United States, Greer said. Yeah, retaliation, meaning you attack Canada and they are retaliating and responding to your trade war, you idiot. Greer then goes on to say, U.S. offered more favorable access to the U.S. market. You should just be honored to have slightly more favorable access. And Canada was like, treat us with dignity, treat us with respect, or get the hell out of here. We don't need to do a deal with you. Canada has looked to Europe and Asia to expand its trade relations outside of the United States. Senior Trump administration officials say the Section 338 tariffs, those are the Smoot-Hawley 1930 tariffs that led to the Great Depression. Yep, Donald Trump is a smart guy, everybody. Let's bring back the Great Depression tariffs. The 338 tariffs of 50% of certain Canadian imports will take effect 12:01 a.m. That's right now. On Saturday, senior Trump regime officials said an agreement would have reduced the tariffs substantially. Prime Minister Carney put out this statement moments ago. Let me read it to you. Over the past 18 months, Canada's new government has focused on building our strength at home, diversifying our partnerships abroad, and striking a fair deal with the United States. Our objectives in our trade negotiations have been the following: preserve tariff-free access to the U.S. for the vast majority of Canadian business, provide greater stability to our trade relationship, significantly reduce U.S. tariffs on our key strategic industries so that Canadian business in these sectors would have the best access of any in the world, protect our small and medium-sized businesses, the lifeblood of our economy, including by removing the imminent threat of new tariffs, and maintain our flexibility, independence, and sovereignty so we can keep building the Canada we want. We have recognized from the beginning that America has changed and that we will not return to our old relationship. Our government understood before many that America is altering all of its trade relationships, putting tariffs on its closest allies and charging for access to its vast market. We have worked in that context to strike a fair deal that would provide the best access to the U.S. market and greater certainty to Canadian business and workers. Throughout, our goal has been to secure the best deal for Canadians, never a deal at any price or on any deadline. In recent weeks, we made important progress toward improving Canada's position as having the best deal in the world with the U.S. However, that progress has not been enough to meet our objectives for Canadians. As a result, this evening, I have decided to suspend trade negotiations with the United States and have directed Canada's negotiators to return to Ottawa. They have worked hard in good faith to defend the interest of Canadians throughout these negotiations up until the very last minute. However, last-minute changes in the U.S. proposed terms were unfair, uneconomic, and called into question the reliability of any deal. At midnight tonight, the U.S. intends to impose a 50% tariff on roughly $28 billion of Canadian goods. Canada will match those tariffs dollar for dollar to protect our workers and businesses. In the coming days, the government will introduce additional measures to support Canadian workers and businesses, building on the nearly $25 billion in support provided over the past 18 months. These actions complement Canada's core economic strategy. From day one, we have been focused on building our strength at home and diversifying our partnerships abroad. That strategy is working. We are advancing nearly $500 billion in major infrastructure projects. In parallel, we are unlocking new export markets for Canadian businesses. Our existing free trade deals already provide Canada with preferential access to $1.5 billion, so 1.5 billion consumers, and we are on track to double that market access by the end of this year. Canadian economic growth is accelerating, and we are on course to have the second fastest growth in the G7 over the next 2 years. Our economy is creating jobs at 4 times the rate of the United States. Our exports to non-U.S. markets are on track to double over the next decade. Foreign direct investment in Canada is at its highest level in 2 decades, running at twice the rate of our nearest G7 competitor. Canada now ranks as the most attractive country in the world for infrastructure investment. Canada has what the world wants, and we will not allow any nation to determine our future. We will set our own course to keep building Canada strong for all. Signed, Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada. History, folks, this evening, Friday, August 21 into the early hours of Saturday, August 22nd, Canada saying, we will not be bullied, we will not submit, and we will not have last-minute terms be injected by bad faith U.S. negotiators, which call into question the very essence of these discussions in the first place. And Prime Minister Carney said, we will respond with retaliation as well. Donald Trump earlier today, before that deranged rally that I just covered in South Carolina, said, I think we're going to get the deal done with Canada. I think we're going to get a deal done. And then we're going to do a deal. I'm a deal guy. Deal, 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 deal. Nope. You are a fraud guy. You are a felon guy. You are an effed up guy. You are a complete sicko guy. Here's what Donald Trump said on his way to South Carolina. Let's play it.
Canada, have you come to a deal there?
Pretty much, I think so. We'll see. I've dealt with the Prime Minister, have a good relationship. And yeah, we have to take care of our farmers. The farmers are very important to me. And the deal with Canada is moving along, and we should be able to have a deal with Canada. We're also starting on a new deal with Mexico. A much better deal for the United States. I only make good deals. Much better deal for the United States, both with Canada and Mexico. Thank you very much.
Then in that same outside of the Qatari Air Force One with Natalie presser that Donald Trump threw, Donald Trump said that if the bond market doesn't treat him nicer, because the U.S. bond market's just a disaster right now, the 30-year Treasury yield, 5.2, 5.3%, the 10-year, 4.7, and this is just going to make it way worse. Also, Canada is a major U.S. bondholder. If Canada unloads those bonds, we could be seeing a 6 handle, a 7 handle when it comes to that 30-year. Things could get very ugly very quickly if Canada just starts unloading some of those bonds as well. And if China does and others, this could get really ugly for the United States. But Donald Trump said, if the bond market doesn't treat me nicer, we may go to war with the bond market. There's always the war option, the military option. You're going to use the military against the bond market, you idiot? What are you talking about? Play this clip.
Did you direct Secretary Besson to intervene in the bond market? Was
No,
that your idea?
not at all. No, he's a very capable man. He wanted to do it. He's very good at it. He has a good touch, very good natural touch for the bonds and interest, and he did that, yeah.
The yields have come back up since then. Have you talked to him about another type of intervention? Is that something he will be
We
doing?
have many types of intervention. That's one. The ultimate intervention is our military. And if we have to use that, we will, yeah.
And then earlier in the day, Donald Trump talked about how he was going to throw the American ranchers under the bus in favor of foreign ranchers. And Donald Trump said that the foreign ranchers would be bringing in huge amounts of cattle so that the price of ground beef would go, the price of beef would go down, and that they would undercut domestic ranchers by 25%. And the U.S. domestic ranchers were like, WTF? What are you talking about? So Donald Trump was asked, so who'd you do that deal with, Donald? You claim you did a deal with other countries that were going to now export more beef into the United States to undercut the U.S. domestic market artificially by 25%. Tell us, who's this deal with? And Donald Trump goes, I don't want to say, I'm not going to tell you. Here, play this clip.
Mr. President, on that beef deal, which countries did you make that deal with? What are the sources
Which
of
deal?
the beef deal?
I don't want to say which countries, but there are a few countries, but they're going to be sending in the highest quality beef, and it's something that we need.
The liquor industry in America is not a small thing, and it is not some foreign-owned enterprise that you could argue has divided loyalties, because this is an industry that is deeply rooted in American soil and American tradition and American jobs. From the Kentucky bourbon distilleries that have been running for generations, to the Tennessee whiskey makers, to the craft distilleries that have been popping up in small towns and rural communities across the country over the past decade. And these are exactly the kind of businesses and exactly the kind of communities that Trump built his entire political brand around protecting and fighting for. And watching them come out publicly against his tariff policy is genuinely remarkable. And in my opinion, it should be getting a lot more attention than it is, because it tells you something very real about what is actually happening on the ground that the political messaging from the White House is not capturing. The way the tariffs are hurting the American liquor industry is not complicated and does not require any special economic knowledge to understand, because it works like this. When Trump puts tariffs on goods coming in from other countries, those other countries respond by putting their own tariffs on American goods going out. And the American liquor industry depends heavily on export markets in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world to sell their products. And when those countries slap retaliatory tariffs on American bourbon and American whiskey and American spirits, the price of those products goes up in those markets, and foreign consumers buy less of them, and the American distilleries that make those products sell less and make less money, and in some cases have to let workers go. And I think this is one of the most straightforward and most avoidable own goals of this entire trade war, because the liquor industry was not asking for this fight and did not need this fight, and is now paying a real price for a policy that was never going to help them, and that anyone who thought about it carefully could have seen was going to hurt them. The Kentucky bourbon angle is particularly significant in my opinion because Kentucky is not a blue state, and bourbon is not a coastal elite product, and the people making bourbon and the people whose jobs depend on the bourbon industry are exactly the voters Trump needs and has been counting on. And watching the bourbon industry go to Washington and lobby against his own tariff policy and make public statements about how the retaliatory tariffs from the European Union are costing them sales and costing their workers jobs is the kind of thing that should be politically very uncomfortable for an administration that has staked so much on the idea that its trade policy is helping American workers in exactly these kinds of industries, in exactly these kinds of communities. The craft distillery dimension adds another layer that I think is worth paying attention to, because the craft distillery boom has been one of the genuine economic success stories in rural America over the past decade, with small operations opening up in communities that desperately needed new economic activity and creating local jobs and attracting tourism and giving people a reason to come to towns that had been hollowed out by previous economic disruptions. And a lot of those craft distilleries are now dealing with higher costs for the equipment they need to operate, because a lot of that equipment is imported and subject to tariffs, higher costs for some of the ingredients they use, and reduced access to export markets that had been an important part of their growth story. And the idea that a policy designed to help American businesses is making life harder for exactly these kinds of small American businesses in exactly the kinds of communities that need economic activity the most is something that I genuinely think should make people angry, because it is not a side effect that nobody could have predicted, but is a completely foreseeable consequence of a trade policy that was designed without adequate thought for how it would actually land on the American businesses it was supposed to help. The broader political signal here is one that I think the White House should be taking very seriously, even if the signs suggest they are not, because the liquor industry turning against the tariffs is not an isolated incident, but is part of a pattern of American industries and American businesses pushing back against trade policies that were sold as being in their interest and that are turning out in practice to work against them. And when you combine that with the special election results showing big swings against Republicans in safe territory and the economic data showing 0.5% GDP growth, you start to see a picture of an administration whose economic story is falling apart in real time. And in my honest opinion, the people who are going to pay the biggest price for that are not the people at the top who made these decisions, but the working people in bourbon country and in farm country and in small towns across America who were promised something very different from what they are getting. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Does the liquor industry pushing back against the tariffs actually move the needle with the administration, or does Trump dig in regardless of which industries are getting hurt? Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell because we are covering every development as it comes. See you in the next one. Stay safe.